my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo, where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo. Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course, and it is Thursday, so it means time for our Thursday Trends episode, first one of season 3. And to kick things off, man, friend of the show, an amazing content creator and host of the new podcast, Mofongo Wars, our guy, Luisito Osorio. How you feeling, my bro?
I'm doing good, brother. I'm doing good. I'm finally learning the intricacies and complications of doing podcasting.
Yeah, and listen, you relate to the struggle.
Bro, I'm telling you, if I thought it was just like I light a cam and, you know, I look nice and I talk shit, and it's way more than that.
Yeah, man, it's not easy, but you'll get into the flow of it, man, and before you know it, you're gonna be a pro at all this stuff. And you have a lot of great takes on it, on in general. I've been following your TikTok, and there's a lot of things that, like, since I've been off since November, I've been like, fuck, I wish I was on so I can get Luisito back on the show, because you've been having some opinions that some would deem to be controversial coming from a liberal. So of course we're going to touch on all things Biden in this show. I mean, we're now in an actual election year, right? The whole nonsense and circus of the Republican primary is essentially over, right? So we know who our candidates are. You've been very outspoken. It's been kind of very much on brand with a lot of the conversations happening. So I want to get your take on all things Biden. We're also going to talk about immigration and some of these surprising statistics that are coming out of the economy actually being in a projected better place because of some of this immigration that we've seen, which is contrary to a lot of people's criticism of immigration, and also the Trump sneakers, which I'm sure you've seen at this point. I
had the misfortune of seeing them.
Yeah, we're gonna have to touch on that dumpster fire that is the Trump sneakers, and then to lighten things up a little bit, I also had seen that you had actually started doing a lot more sort of dating content and lifestyle content on your TikTok, and I came across this video on Instagram that we'll get into, talking about dating outside of your culture, right? And they were kind of getting people's perspective on it. So I wanted to kind of get your take on it, seeing as now you really have gone into that world as well. So we'll get into all that stuff, man. But first and foremost, let's just get into like some of the heavier stuff, the nonsense, and we'll do it in a segment we call For the People in the Back. Say it louder for the people in the back. All right, so you had this article that I pulled from wearemetoo.com, and they're talking about how the Congressional Budget Office has actually shown that numbers-wise, the nation's economy is actually getting stronger because of immigrants, right? So just to kind of give you a little preface of what they said in this article, they said, according to a statement by the director on the budget and economic outlook for the next 10 years, projections for the next 10 years, the national deficit is smaller than last year because economic output is higher. This is partly the result of more people working, most of them immigrants. The government agencies estimate that labor force in 2033 will increase by 5.2 million people. And they're saying that this is because of high net immigration. And they're saying as a result of those changes in the labor force, they estimate that from 2023 to 2034, GDP will be greater by about $7 trillion in revenue, and greater by $1 trillion more than it actually would have been otherwise without said immigration. And they're also talking about the housing market as well, how more people in the country creates more of a demand and actually keeps the housing market as hot as it has been, essentially, right? And this is very much counter to a lot of the talking points on the other side, right? And not to say that our immigration problem doesn't have its faults, right? That there isn't an actual problem with people in New York City who don't have places to go, right? And there's all kinds of chaos being caused in those places. But I think the sort of other side that's not spoken about is what happens when you have more people here in the country spending money, working jobs, and contributing to the economy. Because regardless of their legal status, they have to buy groceries somewhere, they have to be paying rent somewhere, they have to be paying for gas, all of those different things. And that seems like a point that is overlooked by the right when they are villainizing immigrants coming into this country. So I guess your take in general on what you've been seeing with immigration, but also the numbers and projections that are coming out here.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to speak on the supposed crisis of immigration, because in reality, it's not a crisis. It's more of a crisis in managing a problem. I think that's a conversation to be had.
Yeah.
A lot of situations with this immigration thing, it's more of lack of planning than anything else.
Sure.
New York might be a prime example of that, but then you have on the flip side a place like Colorado. We have a large immigrant population that is coming in through the border, and we manage them accordingly. Even when we didn't have the funds for them, we managed to cut some services in the city where we're an essential, and we managed to help them out, help immigrants out, even when the federal government wasn't providing funding for us. So, there's ways of going about them. I think that more than anything, the situation that's happening in Texas, for example, that has been all over the news, is more of a lack of wanting to help. And it's rooted basically on racism, They don't want to say it is that, but in reality, we all know what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, that's even proven in Trump sort of from the sidelines trying to derail any sort of plans that Democrats are putting forward for the border, right? It's literally, I think that's a great way of putting it. It's more of a crisis of management, as you said, because people aren't caring enough to manage it. It's actually more beneficial for them to have absolute chaos in an election year, because then it makes them look like they were right all along. The Democrats have no control over this. When in reality, if everybody was working together, this could be a manageable situation. It just wouldn't be a solid talking point for the Republicans in an election year, which is the real sort of fucked up thing about our country right now, is that there are games being played, and they are kind of playing into people's fears just to get the vote, and actually purposely not doing their job and doing all that they can, because they know if they leave things in chaos, it makes it much easier for them to have the result that they're hoping for, which is Donald Trump serving in office all over again.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the worst situations, right? We don't understand that this is a very powerful and robust economy, enough to provide for everybody, even people that are not from here. But there's also a lack of wanting to do it. But the problem is that eventually that is going to backfire, because those people are very productive members of society. They do jobs that a lot of people don't want to do.
Yeah.
So the prime example of that happened in Florida, right? Where Ron DeSantis created these draconian laws in which immigrants were being persecuted and arrested. And a lot of them chose to leave the state. And then later you had farming communities and owners crying at the top of their lungs saying, hey, this situation that you guys created, now it's hurting the pockets of people that are in entrepreneurship in the farming communities, because we have no one to work that land.
Right.
And then the people that were supposedly screaming that, oh, they're taking our jobs, weren't taking those jobs in the first place because they couldn't find anybody to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it affected the economy in Florida to the point where they had to draw back a lot of those laws and a lot of those words that were put out there. So it's interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really, the irony is that the people benefiting from immigrant workers the most are the wealthy, are the elite, right? Because they're the ones benefiting off of the cheaper labor, and it's driving up their profit margins, right? So in the public, they're going to cry wolf, they're going to be upset about all that's happening, but behind closed doors, they want this, right? Because if they end up having to pay, what's an actual fair wage, right, to Americans who aren't desperate for a better life, essentially, their profit margins are only going to shrink. It's going to come out of their pockets, or it's going to get pushed onto the consumer, which generally ends up happening anyway. But that's sort of the irony here, is that they tell you this problem when they actually have no real interest, and it's actually in their best interest to not even solve said problem. And then even in New York, the sort of irony about, okay, we're running out of money to, take care of this issue and all these things, but then the NYPD has a fucking dance team that's being funded by tax dollars. Like, it's baffles me how people have no awareness, in the people in power are like, hey, we're claiming we're broke. We're claiming we have to cut the arts by millions of dollars. We don't have money to, house migrants. But somehow we're coming up with, money to have the NYPD dance team or the NYPD baseball team or overtime so that cops can arrest people who are jumping the train, and they're paying them excessive overtime that really is not helping the city whatsoever. It's actually taking more money. And it's just, and they parade all this stuff out there. And sadly, most of the public, this goes unnoticed and nobody actually even stops to say, wait a second, they're telling us we don't have money, but how the fuck are they doing all this other dumb shit with said money that is supposedly not supposed to exist?
Yeah, incredible. They seem to pick and choose like a 7-Eleven out of convenience what are worthy causes,
right?
And what's important and what is not. But in all honesty, we go back to it, right? It's deeply rooted racism, anti-immigrant sentiment, which is permeating throughout the country and is not helping anybody. And if anything, is fueling more and more hatred from people who already didn't like immigrants. It's only going to make it worse. So hopefully we can find middle ground. I heard that Joe Biden is trying to negotiate an immigration reform law that works for everybody, and the Republicans are actually like buying in on it. I really, really hope they can do something about it, because at this point, it is truly becoming a crisis to the point where we are using these people as pawns in a larger chess game, and they are the only ones who are going to get hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the real crisis at hand right now, is the weaponization of innocent people and the danger that you're putting them in by creating so much hate with the rhetoric and narrative that you're spewing to your public, because it's the people that are affected are the ones out there on the street every single day. Those are, the people that get radicalized, as we saw with Trump's base. They're the ones who end up taking arms and doing all the crazy shit and ruining their own lives along with the lives of other innocent people for no reason whatsoever, because you decided to create this war that really doesn't exist. It's really just a culture war that really has no actual substance to it, but you're really taking advantage of disenfranchised people on both sides, people who feel like they are not getting the quality of life that they have been promised. And on the other side, people are coming here for a better life. We're all being sort of pawns in this game and pitted against one another, which is the sad part.
Mm-hmm. That is correct. Eventually, it's not going to pan out the way people think. It's going to hurt the economy because, like you said in the beginning of the article, these people are actually contributing to the economy. They are paying taxes indirectly, and they are helping everyone out. And they have children too. Children that goes to school with other children. It enriches culture as well. People just don't see it the right way, but hopefully things will get better, because it is an election year, and it's going to be a contentious talking point that might determine whether voters are going to swing one way or another.
Yeah, no, just to double up on one of the points that you made about their children. It's also saying America has an aging workforce. And a lot of these migrants, these immigrants they're talking about, are falling between the ages of 25 to 54, right? So they are the next generation of workers for the next 30, plus years in this economy. So they're actually, again, adding the numbers that we need in key demographics that we need out there in the workforce in order for, the economy to keep running and to keep, being as good as it surprisingly has been as of late. So, I mean, that's kind of a perfect segue into all things Biden, right? Because there is a really interesting conversation that is really happening right now. And you were having this on your social media, on your TikTok, sort of taking a stand that you're not just going to accept the Democrats kind of giving us the hey, it's this or nothing essentially type of thing, right? The idea that it's the lesser of the two evils once again, right? And that's been echoed by other people like Jon Stewart, who now is in the news getting all types of backlash because he was stating facts about Joe Biden being old, just like Donald Trump being old, right? And it's interesting how we're being attacked for our opinions now by the left because because we disagree with their choices. And to be fair, I do want to set this up before I kind of turn the table over to you. To be fair, Biden has, as of late, been doing some good things, right? We have this $1.2 billion student loan debt forgiveness for over 150,000 borrowers. The economy is actually doing well. People having jobs is at record numbers right now, right? The unemployment rate is super low. Inflation has begun to
Sure.
go down. So all of the things that people are looking for, that they were critiquing him about, he seems to be getting a strong hold on now moving into this election year, right? Now,
Yeah.
with that said, what is sort of your take that you're having, or the stance that you're having, with all that knowledge in mind, and as well as knowing that Trump is obviously going to be on the other side of the aisle when this election happens?
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting takes I gotten from people and a lot of criticism and backlash. There's a lot of ways that you can approach this, right? My main concern with Joe Biden in the beginning of the situation with Gaza and the Palestinian people
Yeah.
was that we were funding it's not even a war. I mean, we're basically funding a genocide, and it has been determined by the International Court of Justice that the state of Israel should, in fact, refrain from committing genocidal acts. So a higher court of, I believe it was 16 judges or 15, I'm losing the number right now, including one of them being an Israeli, said, we need to dial it back, and the people that are responsible need to come forward. But we can't keep bombarding a place where there's a 50% population of children and slaughtering these people to attune the number of close to 30,000 at this point, and not take any recourse on it. And unfortunately, Joe Biden, him by himself, right, without Congress or asking anybody else, is choosing to send more weapons and open weapons caches across the globe for Israel to have access for more weapons provided by the United States government to keep committing genocidal acts. So obviously, I had a big problem with that when I mentioned it. And a lot of people said, well, Trump is going to do worse. I get it. But at the same time, these people need help now. And the ceasefire need to be now.
Right.
In November, none of this is going to matter because the Palestinian people in Gaza will cease to exist. So this is a sense of urgency kind of thing. And because I criticize it, I got a little bit of backlash,
Sure.
I get it. The way I see it in this election, we have two choices. We have a choice of a tyrant and a person who is openly racist and misogynist and is horrible, which is Donald Trump.
Yep.
But then we have somebody who is aiding and abetting in the crime of genocide on a country that doesn't care about people that are minorities and are people of color. So it's a very, very, very difficult situation for me. I actually got the ballot for for voting in the primary in Colorado. I'm a registered Democrat, and Joe Biden's name is in there. I haven't dropped the ballot yet, because I'm definitely not going to vote Republican because it goes against my principles. I never voted Republican in my entire life, and I don't plan to do so now. But I know for a fact that there's a lot of people that are probably not going to vote for Biden because as a form of protest, they don't believe that they should compromise their morals in voting for him, even though with this situation happening in Gaza. To those people, I respect it. But I also respect people who want to vote for him. If you want to vote for Biden, I always say that voting is an individual and very personal choice. And I would not tell anybody to do one or the other. And people they ask me all the time, well, you're an influencer, you got influence over people. And I say, yeah, but I'm not telling anybody how to vote. I'm just telling people to do what they think is right, whether it's voting for him or not voting at all. I do tell people not to vote for Trump because I think he's a threat to democracy and he's a horrible human. But then there's also the argument of if we're not voting for Biden, we are basically giving a vote to Trump. And that's a conversation to be had as well.
Yeah, it really is a difficult predicament. And I echo your sentiment about Biden's really just lackluster approach to what's going on in Israel and Gaza. I mean, the U.S. is the only country that is not demanding the ceasefire, that it actually is vetoing the NATO proposal for a ceasefire for a demand. And and they're not saying no ceasefire whatsoever. They're saying they want certain things within that. But I do think obviously it's not helping Biden's electability to be taking a stance that is very drastically different than the majority of the people who are supposedly going to be the ones voting for him, right? Than his base. I think that that reflection of it's old world politics, right? He's playing the game of wanting the ally of Israel, but he's ignoring his base. And in the era that we live in today, where everybody has the ability to have their opinion vocalized, you're really going to stir up your base in the wrong way, because now you have other people giving them information that maybe isn't being spoken about by the candidate when they're on the news or things like that, right? Or they're now having
Yeah.
their eyes opened to, oh wow, this person's actually right. Like he really is doing something that goes against everything I believe. You know, he's not taking a stance. He's not the person I thought he was, or the type of person that I feel like I want to vote for or support in that way. And
Yeah.
it's just really, I don't know, man. It's a difficult time, and it almost, I mean, I felt this way when Hillary got the nomination over Bernie. The Democrats very obviously backed Hillary over Bernie because he wasn't a real Democrat, right? Regardless of the fact that he really had an energy about him that was really getting people inspired to come out and vote, particularly young people, in a similar way that Obama was able to do when he ran for office. And we probably wouldn't even have, any of this mess of Trump had they have actually backed Bernie, who the people really did want, right? And it's like history continuing to repeat itself of Democrats playing old school politics, ignoring their base and thinking that just by villainizing the other side, everyone else is going to fall in line. And I think that's part of that's the bigger problem. The thing that fucks up us as the voter, then it's also like, well, you're right. Trump is a threat to democracy. So either we sort of destroy the country as we know it potentially by not voting or by voting for Trump, or we just keep getting fucked by the side that's supposed to be, having our best interest in mind and obviously doesn't for the next few generations or whatever it ends up being. And really, we're all between a rock and a hard place. And I think that's the difficult part for so many people who are struggling with, their morality and what the hell to do in this election.
Yeah, and the problem also is that you end up pushing people that are loyal Democrats to say, I let you play this game before where you were pushing candidates that we didn't want forward. And I gave you the vote the first time for Joe Biden because we were in a situation that was dire, because we didn't want Donald Trump to win. But at the same time, you have to put something better to the table, because what's going to happen is that people are going to go for third-party candidacy, which is what's happening right now with Dr. West, Claudia de la Cruz. You got other candidates out there that want to step up to the plate and say, hey, we are bringing ideas that are fresh. We are not going to do things the old way, and give us a chance. And a lot of people are entertaining that idea. But the problem is that then you're taking that vote and you're splitting it. They're not going to vote for Trump, but you're creating a fissure within the party that is not benefiting anybody. The other argument is that he is old. But listen, Donald Trump is old too. The thing is that then people start talking about ageism. Well, that's not okay, But at the same time, I love my dad and he's old. I wouldn't give him the keys to a Boeing plane.
Right.
It's like you got to be honest about certain things and how things are affected.
Right.
And I worry. I worry about Joe Biden's health. I worry about, whether he's going to be able to finish the term or not in good ways. It's a very difficult situation we have right now with the election. But at the same time, I think it's all about accountability.
Yeah.
I think we need, as voters, as taxpayers, as citizens of the United States of America, we have a responsibility to not only vote for our leaders, to elect them, but to also criticize them, or criticize them openly on the internet. I have a very large platform, and I realize that a lot of my words can sway people. But at the same time, I'm not going to stop speaking my truth and what I believe to be wrong because the other guy is bad. Like I have to be able, because otherwise we turn into Trumpers.
Yeah.
If we don't see the bad in our own candidates and we're not able to criticize him, and it's both blue no matter who, even if you're a genocidal one, then we're no different than Colt 45, right? This is why I coined the term recently on TikTok, Blue MAGA, when they started going after me. And a lot of them say, well, you're going to be screwed. You're going to get deported. And I'm like, I find it real funny that my own Democrats are saying that I'm going to be deported when they should know that I'm a U.S. citizen.
Right.
But they were quick to their racism and to put me in that box, right? Yep. So now they're threatening me with things that are not even going to happen to me. But the racial card came out really quick when they were like, you're going to get deported. Listen, people don't work well under threat and under feeling the value. Yep. We need to listen and to minorities and marginalized communities and hear where they are coming from. Because the lesser of two evils is not less for the Latino community, for indigenous people, is still bad, so it may not be as bad for white people. But the problem is that also we got a lot of white liberals right now who are hopping on that trend, but it's because it's finally going to affect them. It's the same thing with white women. Women of color have been telling white women for a while that our abortion rights are under attack. But it wasn't until Roe v. Wade that they woke up, right? Because I think a lot of white wealthy liberals run unaffected by problems created by their own party until it affects them, and then they want to move.
Right.
So no, we need to like listen to marginalized communities and stop blaming them and understand where we're coming from as well, because they don't understand that when you can tell a Palestinian, hey, let's figure it out in November. No, those people have family members there. They have children, they have daughters, sons, fathers. These people are love to them. And the problem is that we are seeing them being slaughtered in real time, and you're telling them to wait out until November.
Well, they're still hostages.
It's terrible.
There are literally still hostages. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you don't give a shit about them because it doesn't affect you. Oh, we need to think about our country first. But that's their country, and they're Palestinian Americans living here. It happened to Rashida Tlaib. She was canceled and censored by her own party, the Democratic Party, saying that she was an anti-Semite because she was saying from the river to the sea.
Right.
No, we need to understand the struggle of the Palestinian people, which to me is personal. I have Palestinian friends. I sat down and broke bread with them, stayed in their houses, and they're telling me, Luis, this situation is very sad, but it's finally being heard. But now people are seeing that the Democratic Party is part of the problem, and they need to reform. They are my first choice to go to, but they need to change the stance on this and a lot of other international politics. At one point, it needs to stop. We cannot keep feeding into this narrative where it's affecting people globally, and we're just like looking from afar thinking, well, if it doesn't affect me, out of sight, out of mind.
Right. Well, I mean, the blue MAGA is spot on, because it's true. Like the fact that people like you or Jon Stewart are just having an open dialogue, asking questions, and sort of explaining their own fears and apprehension about their potential candidate, and that is deemed controversial and they're getting attacked for it. How is that any different than Republicans who are in office who don't have a spine and just fall in line under Trump because they're scared of getting that kind of backlash? Yet we're criticizing them, but then we're also criticizing the very people who are doing what we claim we want, which is having open, healthy dialogue. And that's a scary idea, is extremism on either side, and this it's scary on multiple levels here, right? Because the dialogue is necessary 110%. Then on the other side of it, I know if my critique were to have somebody not vote, or to vote Trump instead, or even to vote independent, and Biden ends up losing by a very small margin of people, I might feel some sort of guilt in that, and then feel like, did I bring on the worst by speaking my opinion almost, and I guess I'm curious for you, have you thought about that, or how would you sort of shoulder any sort of that kind of weight if that worst case scenario were to happen?
Yeah, I think about it all the time. I think about it every day. And the answer is I don't care, because it's, at the end of the day, it's not my fault. It's the fault of the Democratic Party. I said this many times on many of my lives, on many of my videos. The only people that are to blame if they lose the election in 2024 is the Democratic Party. No one else. Our job as citizens is to vote and to elect our candidates to the best of our ability based on their platform, and if it lines up with our personal beliefs and our morals and our values and what we want for the country. If it doesn't line up with our values and what we believe, then we have a right as citizens of the United States to not vote for them. That's actually one of the rights. They call it a right because it's the right to, you can exercise it or you cannot. If you choose not to vote, that's also an exercise of your right, because that candidate doesn't inspire you and you don't believe in what they stand for. And that's the fault of the candidate and the DNC for putting that candidate up. Yeah. We've been telling them, screaming at the top of our lungs, Genocide Joe, we don't like it. He's funding the war. He's funding the conflict. And the Democratic Party, for better or for worse, doesn't seem to be listening. Right. They have their own agenda. And whatever that agenda may be, if they want to run the course on it, they are taking a chance, a great peril, because they might lose the election because of this stubbornness. But, there's also a lot of people that support Joe Biden. And to those people, I say, fine. To the Democratic Party, the DNC, that's a gamble. And they either run with it and say, well, we'll run with it. These people will vote for us no matter what. but they're not thinking, well, we might lose. I was watching Fahrenheit 11/9 the other day, the film by Michael Moore, and it was the same. This is the same thing that happened with Hillary all over again. Democrats are high and mighty in power. They think the economy is doing great. And it is kind of, it also depends on how you judge it because, sometimes people judge the economy by how the stock is doing,
Right.
but there's a lot of people that don't even hold
Sure.
stock. So,
yeah, and GDP isn't like a foolproof way of saying that everybody is doing well,
yeah. Yeah, I always say don't judge the economy by how the rich are doing.
Right.
And let me tell you, there's a lot of people in here that are like middle class, but the middle class here is almost wealthy. These are people that are holding 2 or 3 properties. That's not the situation of the average American Joe. So again, you're banking on this economy that is kind of like a bubble for some people, and you think everybody's doing the same. Not necessarily, there's a lot of people that don't line up with this stuff, and you are taking a huge gamble. They took it with Hillary. Everybody went to bed thinking that Hillary had it and she was going to be a landslide, and it didn't happen. Because sometimes when you get high and mighty and you think you're in a position where everything is going fine, you're not seeing things for what they are sometimes. And we might lose the election, and it's not going to be the fault of Ramos and Luis and anybody else. It's going to be the fault of the people that are choosing candidates that are not likable in many ways and that are also sometimes not even electable. And there's a poll recently that ran on Joe Biden being the most unpopular candidate in the past fucking 40 years. And I can see that. I talk to Arabs in Michigan, I can talk to them in Chicago, and they say none of us are going to vote for him. And Joe Biden needs Michigan to win. Last time he won it by like not a lot. So, I would urge caution to the Democratic Party. I was talking one time to one of my friends here, Carlos Espina. He has a very large following, and he was talking about no immigration reform, no voting. And he was swaying all of his people to not vote. I didn't agree with him at that time. I said, bro, you're playing a very dangerous game because if it doesn't go your way, we're going to have to deal with Trump in our hands. And he told me something that I'll never forget. He said, well, then how do we hold our politicians accountable if we don't criticize them and put the fear of God in them so that they move around and choose and to change things? Then we're not doing anything. And I'm like, you're kind of right. I agree with him more now because I think we're getting to the point where the Democratic Party just wants to do whatever the fuck they want. And that's a problem to me, with people with Pelosi saying that in the protesting, we're holding pundits from Russia. It's just becoming this disgusting sport of they want to be right no matter what. And I don't appreciate it. So again, it's time to put the pressure on and time to do some changes for them. I hope they listen because otherwise we're going to get elect possibly one of the worst candidates in the history of humankind, Donald Trump. And he is a threat to democracy. I believe that he might run in a dictatorship and whatnot. Project 2025 is a real fucking deal, and he wants to eliminate a bunch of government agencies. He wants to bring back churches and religion into schools. There's a lot of shit that's at stake, and I recognize that. But we got to do better. We got to bring the best candidate because when you're fighting against a cult leader, you got to bring your best because convincing a cult is a very difficult thing.
Yeah. Yep. No, I think you're hitting on so many things, and obviously we could talk about this for hours. But yeah, I think it's kind of at the end of the day, it's if you've ever had a family member who is dealing with addiction or things like that, there's only but so much help you can give that person. They need to also recognize their own fault and take responsibility and make a change in their life, in order for that to actually be a long change that their life then, takes a full 180. And you can't feel guilt if they never end up making that change because again, that's not your responsibility, nor do you even have the power to change that person's life completely, And I think Democrats, to your point, their cockiness is in fact going to be what ends up doing them in at the end of the day. And if they haven't woken up to it at this point, I really don't know, what the fuck else it would take, like the fact that and why not at least just entertain us with a primary? You know what I mean? Just for the sake of saying you did it, just so we could see what else is out there. And, if you really believe in Biden the way you say you are, then he really should have no problem handling whoever is challenging him, from the Democratic Party and coming up with the best idea and getting people excited about that, right? But the fact that there's not even a discussion and then you're angry if there's any critique, it seems more like they're interested in pushing an agenda rather than actually what is best for the people or what the will of the people is. And to your point, that really makes them no different than what the other side is doing at the end of the day. I don't know, scary stuff. One thing we can say though, at least there have not been Biden sneakers yet. Thank
Thank
God,
God.
not
Yeah.
yet. But Trump has
Yeah.
has done this, and he was. This is all coming obviously after he's being fined like a crazy person with all these court cases that are happening. I mean, in New York alone, it's $350 million in penalties that this man has to pay in a civil fraud case. But he was at SneakerCon in Philadelphia this last weekend. He unveiled these horrendous gold sneakers that are for sale for $399. They say never surrender on them. They're these gold high tops with a T emblazoned on them and an American flag on them, of course.
Yeah.
And his base loves it, obviously. But it's, I mean, obviously it's a hot mess in general, just him putting out these sneakers. What's wild to me, though, at the end of the day, it's like, how the fuck has he not run out of money at this point when it comes to lawyer fees, all the, the lawsuits that are happening, all these things? Like, how the fuck is he still going right now? Because that was, I think, what a lot of people were banking on, is that you hit him with enough of these things, just by proxy of him losing these cases, he's not going to be able to keep running and keep doing what he has to do. But somehow, some way, man, this guy is fucking real tricky and figuring it out.
Yeah, I have no idea how he fucking does it. It's wild. Well, a lot of people give him money. They're stupid enough to do so. That's another one. Donations, and also his daddy is probably still supporting him, and he probably has a trust somewhere that he's pulling money. But at some point, like any other story, right, money runs out, and I don't know how long he's going to keep going with this grift. But again, with the shooting, just another grift to find voters that are stupid enough to give him their money, because that's what cults do. It's a cult leader, and their cult members are always going to support the leader no matter what. Now this new grift with the shoe is probably happening, and there's also a few people that are behind the Republican Party that are obviously supporting him. The only one left is Nikki Haley, which I don't think she's going to win against him. I think at this point it's pretty much he's going to be the candidate. And it's crazy, the Republican, the GOP is still behind this lunatic, and he's still grifting, trying to take people to the cleaners, and he's being very successful at it. And so I always say, if you're stupid enough to give him your money, then go ahead.
That's what's crazy. Imagine you being like a blue collar worker. You're making $50,000 a year. You have a family you're supporting, and you're thinking, I'm going to take my hard-earned money and I'm going to donate it to this alleged billionaire because he's getting hit with lawsuits left and right because he's a fucking idiot. Like that. That sounds so psychotic to me, but to your point, it is the typical cult sort of mindset where these people have been brainwashed and they can't seem to see any other way out. But it really defies all logic how you can justify sending your hard-earned money to this rich, successful business guy allegedly, and you're justifying sending, you're barely earning enough to get by, and you're donating money, all left and right to this guy. It's crazy.
It's the most incredible thing I've ever seen in my entire life. We are truly hostage to the largest cult known to mankind with Donald Trump and MAGA in the United States. It's wild. It's going to be a phenomenon that is going to be for the books and studying in universities and forever. It's really crazy. But here we are again with the 2024 election. He is about to go to prison. He is definitely going to get charged with RICO. It's very hard to slither away from an organized crime charge, But he's still fighting it. There's something about that dude. You got to admire his tenacity and his craziness at a point, because it's like, I find it incredible how narcissists operate. It's like this thing where he thinks he can never be stopped. And it's crazy, and people keep supporting him. And the more shit we talk about it, the more people love him. It's a phenomenon. And if he wins, there's going to be no end in sight. That's why I worry. I always tell people when I criticize Biden, I hope I'm wrong. But yeah, this shoe thing is just yet another grift to pay millions of dollars in debt because of shit that he got into. He and no one else. He's the only one to blame for this shit, for scamming people, for lying about his finances, for just being a bullshit artist. It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, and what's sad, on the flip side of it, I think to myself, what if somebody with these sort of talents, because this is a skill, he does have a skill set, right? Regardless of being a piece of shit, this is, I mean, like, it's impressive. It genuinely is. It really fucking is very impressive. Imagine if he was using this for good. Like, think about Think about all we're talking about at this point. It's going to be in the billions when you add up lawyer fees, lawsuit money, all these different things. Think about if that money was
Oh
then
yeah.
flipped to fight poverty, to fight, all the issues that are happening in this
Mhm.
country. How much better of a country we would have to live in if that money was actually being placed in the right places, not in bullshit like these lawsuits, bullshit like his campaign. Like, and that goes across the board with politicians, the amount of money they raise and piss away in just getting their name out there, like the good that that could do.
Oh, dude, it's wild. Yeah, people have no idea. He really, if he wanted to, he could bring the country together and make things better, but he's just like catering to this racist base of people that are completely misogynist and racist. And it's just, they love it. They love the figure that he represents of evil and
Yep.
racism and bullshit businessman grifter. It's just a culture thing, and there's no ending it. It's just going to be one of those things that we're going to have to humiliate it out of everybody and to eradicate him. But I don't know how it's going to happen. It's going to be very, very, very interesting this 2024, because we really have to make tough choices. And, he actually has a chance. He won Iowa by a landslide. A landslide. I was like shocked. There was a lot of people that didn't go vote, but that's always like that, voter turnout is shit in this country, especially when it's
Yeah.
cold. But I was still impressed how he managed to pull all those votes together. It's like a thing. And if people have to remember also, he gained 10,000 million additional votes, if I'm not mistaken, on the election against Biden. So it's not like he was losing
Right.
ground. He lost the election, but Biden got a ton of votes too. So I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see how things sway in
Yeah, I
November.
mean, to your point, Biden had to have record turnout from the black community essentially to pull that win out. And even after everything that happened, COVID, everything, it still was, we're talking about splitting hairs when it came to the actual difference of votes for them in key states, around the country. So and
Correct.
sadly, it's probably going to be even closer, in this election. I don't see how it would be any different.
Mhm. I believe it.
All right, heavy shit. We're gonna lighten it up a little bit. We'll talk some some dating stuff because
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
yeah,
That's
because
great.
man, this is some fucking scary times we live in. So we'll take a breather. All right, so lightening things up a little bit here. Let's talk about the world of dating, which you've made a
Yeah.
bit of a pivot in some of your content into diving into dating. I'm curious what was the interest into diversifying your content a little bit before we get into this.
I always find the world of dating fascinating. I've been dating online for the past 11 years when I got divorced a long time ago. And I read books on it. I done a lot of research because I got legit curious about how the dating scene was being portrayed and things that happen, anecdotal and studies and stuff like that. I just always been fascinated by the topic. And I started swinging on it. And people loved it just as much, as not more, of my political content. It got crazy. And it's actually funny because the second podcast, because I started my podcast this week, the story of my son's accident, go check it out, Mofongo Wars. But the second podcast is going to come out on Monday next week, and it's going to be about
Nice.
dating. It was me. Yeah, it was me and my girlfriend Tab and two other people, my good friend Derek Mayo, who's my co-host, and his girlfriend, and we all sat down, all four of us, to tell stories, to talk about books, about the dating scene, and a lot of funny moments. It's a fantastic podcast, and I think people would appreciate it because my content is diverse. It's about pop culture, about news, about politics, about everything. And one of the things I touch is dating. I actually went viral on one of my videos because I spoke about
Yeah.
marriage benefiting men more than women, and that went everywhere. It went on board. Yeah, it was crazy. It went on board
Yeah.
Panda. It got like on Scary Mommy, like probably 5 or 6 different news articles, and did a bunch of
Yeah.
articles on me. It was very weird. People were telling me, "Hey, you were on this magazine, or you were in this." I'm like, "Really?" And then I started looking online, and then my face was plastered all over the internet because of just that comment. So yeah, it's very interesting. I get a lot of backlash from
Sure.
misogynist men because they don't like it. They think I'm like just like another griff. It's too bad. I just pay no attention to them. But yeah, dating has always been a topic that I'm fascinated on. I'll keep talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are fascinated by it because it's one of the more difficult things to kind of get your head around, right? It's because there's no like, obviously there are structures that people have created and attachment styles and all these different things from studies that have been created, but like when you're out there in the real world, it's hard to fucking decipher what's going on, and so much of it is chance, or if you have your own personal baggage that you're not even aware of, that might affect the way that you're interpreting love and all these things, right? It's so nuanced and fucking complicated that I think everybody's struggling
Yep.
to find the answers that they're searching for, because I think we all are. And one of the
Yes.
sort of age-old topics that comes up a lot, particularly for people of color, is the idea of dating outside of your culture. And this was a video that I had come across here, and it was I'm gonna pull up the actual source for it, but they were basically doing like these street interviews, right? And it was from Hip Latina that had reposted it, and I believe Dating Beyond
Yeah.
Borders was the original video, but they had asked people on the street, essentially, Latin women, what do you think
Yeah.
about dating outside of your culture, right? And I know, I'm sure you've had many of these conversations growing up, and been faced with these different things throughout your course of dating. I know I have, and you have different ideas between different generations. There's a lot of complications to it. I guess first and foremost, what is sort of your mindset when it comes to dating outside of your culture, thoughts, experiences? Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. I date outside of my race. I'm in an interracial relationship. My girlfriend is white. And it's very funny. I get a lot of hate because I speak so much against white supremacy. And there's a lot of stupid people out there that complicate being against white supremacy as I am against white people in general. So they immediately say he's against white supremacy, but he dates a white woman. I'm like, well, yeah, I hate white supremacy. I don't hate white people. There's a difference. I can date outside my race because I think it enriches her culture and it enriches my culture. I embrace differences. I think you should date who you love, who you're attracted to, who compliments you, whether it's a person from Japan or Bangladesh or UK or the United States or Puerto Rico. It doesn't matter. But people tend to create these boxes where they limit themselves to one specific ethnicity or race. I think it's foolish, but if you want to date not outside your race, I won't tell you not to do whatever. Everybody has to search their own version of happiness. I found happiness in a person that's white. I dated white people before. I have no problem with it. It doesn't faze me. But there's a lot of people out there that are dumb enough to not know the difference between being against supremacy, against racism, and wanting you to hold a position of racism and exclude people that are not your color or your ethnicity because you are against racism. It's a very weird way of concocting a thought. But there's a
Yeah.
lot of ignorant people out there that are still, I call them the children of segregation. They were like born in the 1970s and they still think
Yeah.
that we should do the same shit. Oh, date only white people, date only Latinos. And it's usually funny because a lot of it comes from my own community of Latinos saying, oh, well, you shouldn't date a white woman. You talk a lot of shit, but you date white women. I'm like, dude, it's stupid. This is like a circular conversation on your own racism. You need to figure that shit out for yourself. I'm happy with who I am, with who I'm dating, and I don't need to explain myself to anybody why I do it. But it's weird how people get like really riled up over the topic of interracial dating. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it is a hot button topic. I think definitely as a man, you will get the backlash, especially if you're outspoken for your community, and if you don't check all of the sort of stereotypical boxes. Like if you're an outspoken Latin man speaking on Latin issues, you have to have a Latin, significant other, or else you're not a credible voice anymore, right? And that happens in the Black community as well. And I think that's obviously ridiculous. That doesn't affect how you are able to be enmeshed in your community and be aware of what's going on and be an advocate for it. Who you're dating, it really shouldn't have anything to do with that. I think
Right.
the other argument that does bear a little bit of weight is particularly when it comes to perhaps a lack of understanding completely of cultural norms, right? Or maybe feeling like you have to explain the norms of your culture to this other person, right? And maybe how that's exhausting. Or I think a lot of people, particularly when we saw a lot going on over the last few years with like the murder of George Floyd, and that was a thing for me where I was dating somebody who was white, and we just kept butting heads on this because there was sort of this inability to see my point of view that might have been different than the way they grew up. And I think that's where maybe some people begin to run into issues if they're not open enough to realize that maybe they grew up in a bubble. And I think that might be where some of the friction comes up a little bit.
Yeah, I think you definitely have to choose the right person and understand that that person has to understand the nuances and the conversations that need to be had in terms of race relations, of culture, and they have to understand where you're coming from. And if they have willingness to learn and to understand your message, I think it's fine. I don't think you have to like date a minority to be completely understood. Hey, there's minorities who vote for Trump, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And they have internalized racism, which is just as bad.
Right.
I think it's something that racism and understanding race relations is more of an education thing, right? Self-education and wanting to educate yourself, but also wanting to learn from your significant other and trying to hear them and understand them. And also to have them understand you and understand that you probably did grow up in a bubble, that there's some things that you're not used to, or there's things that you just don't understand, and have to want the willingness and the love to educate them and to make them understand certain things. Everything is workable as long as the person is willing to learn and understand where you're coming from and what the lessons are out there for people to learn.
Right. Right. Well, and I think actually even like what's coming to mind as you say that is if the person is unwilling to be open to learning about your culture, or to be unwilling to understand that your point of view, because you have a different experience, might sort of conflict with what they thought was normal, they're probably going to be closed off from other things outside of race and culture, right? They're probably going to be stuck in their ways in other areas of dating that are unhealthy, right? So that goes beyond probably just a lack of understanding. It's a lack of willingness to be open to hearing the other person, having empathy for their point of view, and understanding that you're not the end all be all when it comes to what's right or wrong in there.
Just don't date a Republican and you'll be fine. I never bring down. I just don't date Republican women. It's a strict line. Never do it, no matter how beautiful she is. Not a damn and then it turned out well.
I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb. So let's talk about the Mofongo Wars podcast, because I know this has been. I feel like it's been in the works for a while, or you've like soft launched it here and there, right? But why now were you kind of just like, fuck it, I really got to just go in on actually creating the platform now?
Yeah, I was just telling Derek, 2 years in the making, because I started TikToking 2 years ago, and everybody came in all the time. Luis, you got to do a podcast. You have to put a mic in front of you. There's so many things. I could hear you for hours just talking, and I'm like, I know, but I wanted to give people a good quality product. I wanted to be like, I'm not just going to come out. I try to half-ass it with a ring cam and just talking crap in front of my phone, and I still got somehow 2,700 followers that way. Yeah. But then I said, you know what? I'm going to study the craft of podcasting. I'm going to study other YouTubers that have been successful at it, because I really want to give my followers a good quality product. I brought lighting, camera, software, and I said, I'm going to just finally pull the trigger. And I did. I launched my first episode. They created a lot of buzz. My first episode was about my son. It was a story that I really wanted to tell, a story worth listening to. And everybody that has seen it agree. It's been creating a lot of rave reviews. And now next week, I'm going to go out with the dating one. And obviously my third, fourth, fifth, and all of those are going to be pop news, politics. And I'm also going to touch a lot on the 2024 election. So that podcast is really something that I wanted to do for a while. I finally decided to do it, and it was a really good decision. It is a lot of work, though, and I recognize that work, it's going to help me get better. It's going to be improving from time to time. But I definitely didn't know that it was going to be even 20 times more difficult than TikTok. I thought, well, because I do TikTok, I could do a podcast. But speaking for an hour and doing it in a way that is like has production value and it comes out really nice, it's a lot more complicated than I would have thought. But I got there. I already put my first episode out, and it's only going to get better from here. So I'm staying positive.
Yeah, I mean that's the key, man. You have to just kind of do it, and it's like anything else. It's like at first, if you get a new job, it feels like everything's moving so fast sometimes, right? And you're like just trying to grasp what's going on. Eventually, you end up being able to do that job with your eyes closed, right? And you're looking for the next challenge. I think that's how it is with these sort of things, and I think what I'm sure is fun for you and what I've heard for other people who have like hit me up about podcasting and I tell them to just go ahead and do it is like it's very therapeutic as well though to just kind of sit there and talk and get all this energy and get your thoughts out there, even if it's just to you and your co-host at first, but it's there's something great about being able to have a place to express yourself, right? And I think that's what so many of us are missing in our everyday lives with work, family, and all these things is we don't have the opportunity to really express ourselves and deep dive into all the shit that we're interested in. I think that's the beauty of like modern technology and what podcasting does and TikTok and all that kind of stuff.
Correct. It's definitely an avenue to air grievances and thoughts and stories, and it's a great way of putting it out there. And I love it. So far, it's been a great experience. Mofongo Wars podcast out on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. I love it. It's a very good way of expanding on topics that are complex because sometimes a 3-minute snippet on TikTok doesn't just do justice to the idea, right? In a podcast, you can expand more on it. So it just makes it better.
I love it, bro. I'm excited to check out the episodes. I have it on my list of things to check out this week. Where can people follow you on social media?
Absolutely. Mofongo Wars, that's the most important point. Mofongo Wars podcast is out on YouTube if you want to see it with video. And it's also audio available on Spotify and Apple. And you can also follow my Instagram account. I post pictures of my good trusty dog, Scooby, and my pets, and a lot of other stuff that I do out there. So you can follow me on Instagram at Luisito787. And of course, for now, TikTok, I don't know how long it's going to last because they've been really, really aggressive with shadow banning and taking people down. The platform is getting very different from what it used to be. So I don't know how long it's going to last. But if it lasts, I'll still be there. Luisitorio787. Go follow me on that as well.
I love it, my bro. Well, listen, I always appreciate you coming on the show and giving your take and your perspective. And hopefully we'll get you on here a few more times before the season's over.
Anytime, brother. Anytime. Take care, man.
Man, big shout out to my guy, Luisito, for hopping on the show. Always love hearing his perspective and so damn proud of him. I'm so happy that he finally has gotten the podcast underway. I think it's an amazing thing. I want to do an honorable mention, though. One thing I didn't realize, I literally was just looking at my phone and that I wanted to talk about, which was really, really dope. And it is Bad Bunny, okay? He is actually going to be in NBA 2K24. So I'm pulling up this from my phone right now. He's actually going to have 18 songs from his album are going to be a part of it. And then in career mode on the game, you're actually going to be able to wear a jersey from the Santurce Cangrejeros, which is the local basketball team for the Santurce area of Puerto Rico. So I think it's just really dope. Honestly, I've been on the fence about picking up a Nintendo Switch, and only because when I hang out with my nephew, I like to bust his ass in 2K, and I might actually have to pull the trigger on this. This might be my final thing. Y'all finally got me, 2K. I might have to pull the trigger. I'm not a video games person by any means whatsoever, but for whatever reason, like basketball and football games, I do enjoy playing those. Those keep me entertained forever. So I might end up throwing my life away and getting a Switch and then just never leaving the house because I'm just gonna play so much 2K. So we'll see about that. Now, with that said, I want to get y'all's take on one of these stories that we were talking about today because I know it pushes a lot of people's buttons. So for our Ask a Gringo segment, we're going to touch on one of those. Obviously, it's going to be the dating one. I think y'all already know.
Ask a Gringo.
I have a question. All right, so today's conversation for our Ask a Gringo segment is based around this idea of dating outside of your culture. You heard where Luisito stood. I kind of give you a bit of a tidbit into like what my thoughts were on this whole thing. I'll probably dive into it a little bit more here as we have this conversation. But I asked y'all via my Instagram at DJ Dramos. I asked thoughts or experiences on dating outside of your culture. And y'all love talking about dating. I got a bunch of responses on this one. Let's see. At DJ Tony El Tigre says, it sucks when they don't try to learn or understand your own culture or language. And yeah, I think this is kind of like what we were talking about with Luisito touching on a little bit. And it's interesting. My sister is married to an Italian man, but he is in love with Puerto Rico. Like he, loves going there. He ended up buying a house over there. He's absolutely in love with it. Like loves the culture, loves the food, and is all about it. So it doesn't feel like weird having him around me and my family when we're talking about Puerto Rico, because he's like just as invested in it as the rest of us, and has like a love and appreciation for the island just like the rest of us. But yeah, I think that speaks more to probably the wrong person, right? And for me personally, I've dated outside of my culture. It is not something I'm like dead set on that I have to be, marrying a Latin woman or a Puerto Rican woman, specifically. I'm open, but definitely there has to be this awareness around the love I have for my culture, the differences, and you have to want to be able to be a part of that, right? That is a prerequisite, right? To love and appreciate it, because I love and appreciate it so much. I can't see myself being with somebody who doesn't really understand that completely. So yeah, it would have to be somebody like, like my brother-in-law, who is you know in love with Puerto Rico himself and loves learning more and more about it. And it doesn't hurt that he's Italian, which is like my second favorite food behind Latin food. So we got a good one there. But yeah, I think that also should be a red flag if they're not open to your culture, of understanding it and wanting to celebrate it like you do. They're probably going to be closed off from other aspects of you as well, and definitely maybe is a red flag. Let's see. We got anonymous here. They said controversial opinion. I don't know why I said controversial like that. Controversial opinion. I feel guilty saying this, but I prefer my kids to date a fellow Latino or at least a minority. Relationships are hard enough. I think it's important for your partner to truly understand what it's like growing up brown. But I don't know. Maybe that's a backwards way of thinking. I think it's fair. I think I had talked about this with Luisito. Obviously, I had dated somebody who wasn't Latin, wasn't a person of color. She was a white woman. And this was during kind of the thick of everything happening with George Floyd's murder and Trump and COVID. And we all had so much time on our hands. There were so many conversations happening. And that was like the final straw in our relationship, because just the rift and the tension it created, the lack of understanding, right? And not to say that she's a bad person or anything like that, but for me, particularly doing what I do, where I'm always talking about what's going on and I have a finger on the pulse of these hard, difficult topics, and I don't shy away from them, and it's a part of my my job. It's also what I'm interested in. I'm passionate about advocating for our community and communities of color. I can't get away from it, right? And with that brings on a level of stress where you are feeling like you're constantly being attacked, or you have to constantly be, showing others the reality of the world that we live in. And it's exhausting at times to be so dialed into all that stuff and to be open to critique and people attacking you. And it was exhausting for me to kind of go through a whole day of filming content, or at the time I was working at the Breakfast Club and being, in the midst of everything, and then to go home and have to fight that battle almost, right? Where I then would get into an argument with my significant other about a news story, right? And me trying to explain to her why this was fucked up or why this is important or whatever it is, right? And that was exhausting for me, and that was sort of eye-opening for me for the first time, where I was like, maybe I need to be a little bit more mindful of dating somebody within my own culture. And I think I've grown from that. I've definitely sort of not closed myself off and be like, all right, that was the last one. But it's on my mind. And I think I've gotten better and more mature at being able to like voice my opinion and articulate it and say why it's important to me in a way that isn't so combative. I think 3 years ago, whatever it was, 4 years ago, I didn't have the vocabulary or the emotional maturity to articulate my feelings in a way that wasn't, combative or me trying to be right and you be wrong. But I didn't have like the softness required to have some of these difficult conversations. But yeah, it's still something I think about for sure when I go on a date, or I'm potentially, interested in somebody that isn't in my culture. These are things I hold in the back of my head, where I'm a little bit nervous about where they stand and what it's going to be like, when these conversations inevitably kind of come up. And
it would be easier if it was somebody from a similar background to me, where we had that mutual understanding, that unspoken commonality, even just like the inside jokes or whatever, that would make it slightly easier, you know? But I think, again, the right person, you can sort of make it work. But I get it. I think in all honesty, it is easier if you're dating within your own culture, for sure. Now, is easy always the best thing? Of course not. Easy doesn't mean the right person, you know. But it definitely does make things a bit easier. And again, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, but I understand that sentiment where it feels like it might be a little bit of an easier situation to have somebody who relates to you on that level. And it's one less sort of conversation you need to have, I think is probably the greater point there. And let's see, last one here at Danielle_California_love_LV says, I've always dated outside my culture. I find it more interesting, unique, interesting, exotic, and enriching. I think I might have said interesting twice on there. I apologize. That was me not knowing how to read and not them not knowing how to type. I mean, listen, I think to a degree, for sure, or not even to a degree, I think completely, it is exciting to get to know something completely different and outside of yourself, right? I think that's one of the exciting things about being in a relationship, especially when it's new. And it can be dumb shit like, oh, this television show that I didn't know existed, now I'm watching it, right? Or you find yourself for no reason at all being interested in the Real Housewives, right? And it's like, I hate myself for it, but also, yeah, move over. I want to watch what happens. You know, so I get it. That's a bit exciting. And obviously on a deeper level, being able to explore your native country or culture, food, all of those different things. I think is really, really exciting. I don't know this person, so I can't, what's it called? I can't speak to their agenda, but, and I don't even want to put words in their mouth. They said they've always dated outside their culture. I would only be fearful that it might mean you have some sort of internalized hatred towards your own culture as well. Again, not saying that that's what this person is insinuating or whatever, but I think if you have like this prerequisite where you're like, I only date non-Latinos, then maybe you have some underlying hate towards Latin people that is sort of underneath those layers. Again, I'm not putting that on this person, just hypothetically saying if that's anything somebody could relate to or something to be mindful of. But yeah, I think, listen, this is nuance. It's personal for all of us. If you had a gun to my head and told me, what is your ideal woman? While I don't have a type, of course, I would say I would love to marry a Latin woman and to be able to explore and embrace our Latinness together and you know, have that commonality, I think is beautiful. But I'm not also going to walk away from someone who potentially could be a great partner just because they don't fit into that box, you know? I try to like, A, I don't have a type, but B, I try not to have this prerequisite sort of like my mind made up about a person's attributes in any sort of way. I try not to go into anything thinking that like somebody has to check a particular box in order for me to be interested. I try to just be very open and exploratory at the very least of, you know, what somebody might have to offer that I potentially might not even be aware of, right? So I try not to be too closed off or closed minded, and just be open and let the person show me if they're somebody who's worth being in my life or not, you know, before making any sort of judgment or decision. But yeah, I think it's okay to have a preference and all those different things. And I think, you know, there's a lot of trauma in our history generationally, right? And a lot of things we go through in this life that only we can relate to. We can relate to one another on a deeper level because we have that shared experience. And without it, it does add a challenge that wouldn't have been there, right? Not saying that it's a challenge you can't get over or figure out, but it does present a different experience that wouldn't have been present had, you know, if you are dating somebody within your own culture or person of color, right? So I think those are all just, you know, to each their own. There's no right way, but it's an honest, I think, look at dating and dating as a person of color in general. Plus, for me also, like, last thing I'll say, because I feel like I grew up in this otherness, I would love to have somebody who grew up like hardcore Latino, and not again, not like, I'm not saying that they're better in any sort of way, but like if you're like, hey, Dramos, pick your ideal partner, I would love somebody who's so damn like ingrained in it that I could learn so much that like, that I could practice my Spanish with because they're actually a native speaker, or that they could teach me things, maybe teach me how to dance, that I didn't know before. Like that would be so much fun for me, Again, it's not a prerequisite. I'm not saying that's that's the end all be all, but that would be a really fun experience for me to like dig deeper and find myself within that person as well a little bit when it comes to my Latin culture. I could see the positive and the fun that would have. Um, but yeah, I think love is love at the end of the day. You can't put too many stipulations on things. I think first and foremost, it being somebody who's compatible and makes you happy above all else is the goal, and then everything else is kind of the icing on the cake. Obviously, I know I sound like a cheap self-help book or something like that, but certain things are true. Now, with that said, let's tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for conclusion stew.
All right, we dove into this shit real deep, so I'm really going to quickly go through it. Immigrants are contributing to the fucking economy. This was actually, I got to send this to somebody. I'm not going to call them out because I don't want to fuck up their work, but they were talking about in their workplace, a coworker was expressing anti-immigration sentiment, essentially talking about how immigrants are freeloading off of this country and not bringing any value, blah, 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 right? The same sort of racist talking points. And I love this article really breaking down economically, actually, how immigrants and migrants are helping the economy, are projected to continue to help the economy grow, and also just the common sense that is lacking in so many of these arguments. That where do you think the money that these immigrants make goes? They can't send it all back to their native land. They have to buy groceries, they have to buy diapers, they have to buy drinks, gas, rent apartments, houses, buy houses, this and that, right? In some way, shape, or form, regardless of their status, regardless of them paying taxes directly, they're still contributing to the economy by proxy of their labor and them just spending money as human beings going about their everyday life. So I think this argument that they add nothing, that they just take is obviously bullshit, racist talking points. And I just wanted to make sure we tackle that sort of head on. Now, the harder conversation when we talk about the election 2024, Biden not being a very inspiring candidate, it's not a good place to be in. Obviously, it's incredibly frustrating because it really is a sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't, if you're not a big Biden fan. I think for me personally, this is my take. My final take after really digesting all this. I don't want Biden to be the Democratic candidate. I think that there are better options out there. I think somebody like Gavin Newsom is far more exciting and on his game and has the energy needed to really bring people together. With that said, as frustrating as this saying is, it is the lesser of the two evils. I really hate that, but it is. And I would say for me, the way I'm looking at it is this will hopefully be the last hump we have to get over when it comes to somebody like Trump, right? I don't think he's going to run again in 4 years, maybe, but I mean, he's really going to be that much older at that point. And Democrats will have no choice but to have pushed forth a new, candidate and new energy out there. I think this is, for me personally, I would say this is an eye-opening scenario. Use this moment as a way to open your eyes and to be a wake-up call. The Democrats don't actually give a shit about doing the will of the people. They have their own agenda. With that said, their agenda, while it may not be something I completely agree with, or do I think they're doing enough for the people? Of course not. But their agenda is not as sinister as Trump's agenda. His is to end democracy as we know it, essentially, and to bring this country back by centuries, essentially. Bring us back into the ages of white supremacy and radical religions and all these different things. And as frustrating as it is, for me personally, my take is I bite my lip. I frustratingly cast my ballot for Joe Biden, knowing that the next cycle, I'm going to really be holding the Democrats accountable. It's like, if you've ever been on the receiving end of this as a kid, or if you're a parent yourself and you tell your kid, or you've been told as a kid, wait till we get home. In that moment, your parents, they want to lay the ass whooping of a lifetime on you. But they also knew if they did it in that public scenario, there'd be all kinds of controversy amongst people around them, and they might catch a case, right? So they have to save that anger. They have to bottle it up, drive home, and hold it all in until they get behind the confines of the privacy of their own home. Then they can lay that ass whooping on you, right? And they always did. They never, that anger, somehow they managed to hold on to it until you got home. But that's the way I'm looking at this. I'm mad, I'm frustrated, I'm pissed off, I'm not happy about this. But I'm going to wait till I get home, i.e., next election, that's the time to hold Democrats' feet to the fire. Because then hopefully it won't be Trump that we're fighting against. So the implications of, Republicans winning won't be as bad, right? And that's the time to try to put the fear of God into Democrats. Because I think right now, holding their feet to the fire and putting them, rightfully so, rightfully being angry with them and wanting to rebel, that really is only going to hurt all of us as a country in the long run right now, or at least the foreseeable future. Whereas we kind of just have to suck it up, do our part, and knowing that this is the last time. That's what I see. That's my take. If I'm off base on here, I would love to hear anybody else's take on this. Feel free to DM me at DJ Dramos, and if you think I'm completely off. And this isn't a cosign for the things Biden is doing or not doing, or standing by or not standing by. I'm just trying to think of what is going to actually achieve the greater goal, which is making sure that we have a democracy to come back to. That is where my mind is. And it's not the answer that I want or the advice or opinion I want to be giving to people, but it's where we are. And, it's not always pretty. It's not always what you want it to be. Sometimes you have to just sort of do what's best in the moment, knowing that eventually you're going to make things right. And that's where I stand on that. And these trash ass Trump sneakers, dude, what's frustrating also is he did this at SneakerCon and then brought out these collectors, these, younger kids who are obviously just trying to get clout for social media. I saw a Puerto Rican sneaker collector on there, and he was all excited that he got the friends and family Donald Trump sneakers and all this shit. And it's just sad. It's people are pawns in this man's game. He's trying to raise money any way he can. Sneakers are obviously garbage, but it's the circus act that is Donald Trump. And again, as I said with Luisito, you have to be impressed in some sort of way. You can be disgusted, but still be like, man, I don't know how the fuck he's doing this. There's a lesson to be learned here beyond just morality, but a lesson in tenacity and making shit happen. He could teach a masterclass in that, as disgusting as he is, honestly. And dating outside your culture, I think we really dove into that. I don't need to recap it. Do what makes you happy, whatever makes sense for you. And I don't think there's any right or wrong opinion, as long as you're not one of these people judging others for making decisions that they felt were right for them and their heart, right? You can say, hey, I only date Latinos. That's your opinion. Cool. But the nonsense of shaming others or saying that they are lesser than, or they don't have the right to talk about Latin stuff because they are married to a white man or white woman, that doesn't help us out at all. That is old school caste system bullshit, purity test type of stuff that really doesn't help us at all. It has nothing to do with somebody's credibility on the knowledge they have, the passion they have, and the love they have for their community or culture, right? They happen to fall in love with somebody outside of it. That's beautiful. We should all be so lucky to have found love, right? There's nothing to be ashamed of if you don't check this ridiculous box that really doesn't mean anything. So that's my food for thought. And that's it, man. Wow. Week 1 of season 3 in the fucking books. Crazy. 3 years later, here we are. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. I appreciate y'all. I'm so fucking grateful right now. I have no voice. I'm not used to, I think, talking this much anymore. As much as I missed this routine, I have to admit, it is a lot. I forgot how much it takes to put together 2 podcasts each week. So I'm really sort of reacclimating myself to getting back in the flow of everything. And if I sound a little bit off, I'm not as sharp as I normally am. I apologize. I promise I'm going to get there. Just, trying to get these reps back in, kind of, sweep out the cobwebs from a really long vacation of not doing this show. So we'll keep getting better. Next week, we're striving for better. So with that said, man, thank y'all so much for tuning in. We will catch you, of course, on Tuesday with a brand new episode. Till then, stay safe. Have a beautiful weekend, and we will talk soon. Peace.